know. My name is Curtis Cramblett. I'm a licensed physical therapist. I've been doing that for over 25 years now. I own and run this company called Revolutions in Fitness, where we really believe in helping people accomplish their health and fitness goals to be able to get back to a healthy, active lifestyle. And so I come today with, since we can't see many people alive, how do we continue to help people? And so that's my intention today, is to see if we can't help you through a little bit of knowledge and learn a little bit about your backs and or for the movement professionals out there, because I know there's a couple of you, help your clients. So that's a bit about me. And low back pain, whether that be local low back pain or into the pelvis or down even into the leg, is just so common. And so I'm wondering out there, for the people who have joined us already, how many of you have had low back pain, especially with this shelter in place? If you've had some increase in low back discomfort, or you had some low back discomfort, just type in yes. I've had some. I just want to get you engaged a little bit in thinking about that. That's certainly true for me. As I started to sit a lot typing on the computer, I started to feel some of the old stuff I had. So I've got some note cards because I'll forget everything unless I look at it. It's just so common for when we start to sit a lot more to have this pop up. And the challenge with low back pain is that once you've had it, the likelihood of having it again and again and again goes up. The second occurrence rate is around 85% after the first, and then almost 90% subsequent times. The second thing that's really challenging is each time it reoccurs, it tends to be worse. It starts out as low back, and then it's the next time it happens, a couple years later, it's in the buttock or the hip. The third or the fourth time, next thing you know, you have sciatica or nerve compression down the leg. So it's best not to wait. It's best to catch this early. If it's your first bout of low back pain, or if you haven't had it yet, let's start to look at what's causing it, which is my first goal today. What causes low back pain, and where does low back pain coming from? And then how do you prevent it and get rid of it? So catch it before it starts and start to think about how to get yourself healthier. One of the things I like to think about is this wellness account idea. In this case, we have, and this is my model, who's obviously not doing very well because this is the back side of them, and this, well, is the front side of them. This guy failed physical therapy, I'm sorry to say, so he became a helper. So obviously we've got our low back, but what frequently happens is our wellness account, our body's wellness account, starts to run low. Our mid back gets a little bit stiff. Our hip gets a little bit stiff. And so the next thing you know, we have a tight spot and stuck between that rock and a hard place, we have a low back that's capturing all of that motion. A low back that was really meant to do a whole lot of bending ends up doing a whole lot of twisting. A low back that's meant to have a natural curve in it ends up with either too much of a curve one way or too much of a curve the other way. So the low back, one of the most common causes of low back pain, is the health account, the body's health account, its mobility goes low because the low back gets stuck between a rock and a hard place. What are the structures of the low back that frequently hurt? The low back, if it's stuck between a rock and a hard place, the low back frequently becomes the victim of the stuff above and below. What are some of those structures that frequently have pain? Well, the most famous one, of course, are these discs. Between each bone, you have a disc. It's essentially a shock absorber with some fluid in it, and as we get older, those discs tend to desiccate. As a matter of fact, the number, 80-ish% of people who are age 50, 80-ish% of people who are 50, and I have to look up the numbers, have herniated discs, 80-some%. And interestingly enough, 30% of the population who have no back pain at all, 30% of the population without any symptoms have herniated discs. In other words, you can have a herniated disc, pretty significant one as a matter of fact, without any low back pain. But why? Well, if your health account, if you've got good mobility in your hip and in your thoracic spine, if your health account is high, if you've been sleeping well or eating well, if your health account, your core is strong, is high, it doesn't matter if you've got a herniated disc, or at least it doesn't matter as much. That herniated disc can be absorbed, if you will, by the health of the system around it. So why do we have low back pain? Because these joints back here get compressed and the discs start to leak and the nerves get pushed on, and the SI joint, the connection between your sacrum and your nominate, the SI joint gets compressed and these muscles spasm up. So why do we have low back pain? Because all kinds of things back here get jammed up, but frequently, again, this is the victim with the criminals above and below. This ends up moving too much. So if stiffness is number one, the mobility issue is number one. Number two is we frequently don't have the stability, have the control, the deep muscle control of our core. We'll be talking about exercises today about deep muscle mobility. So what the heck are we doing today? Today, number one, what causes low back pain? Number two, we're going to talk about some of the ways to prevent that. And finally, number three, we're going to talk about some exercises. So I'm going to put him aside. Excuse me for a moment. Stay. So I alluded to it for a moment, but I just want to come back to it. The low back account isn't just about the back. It's about our wellness, and not just the mobility in our hips and our thoracic spine, but how are you eating? Do you have a lot of inflammation in your system? Are you sleeping enough? Because that makes a difference in recovery. Are you drinking enough water? Are you getting enough movement? All of these things are either ways of putting money into your health account or taking money out of your health account. So think global wellness when you think back. Don't just think what hurts in this moment, because so frequently we put band-aids on the things that hurt as opposed to actually chasing the underlying drivers and the causes. So think about the balanced wellness account. And so if you can take money out of the account and you can put money into the account, how do we start to put money into the account, the balanced wellness account, if you will? So first I'd like to say, of course, we're going to talk about that today, but just note that a lot of the answers to that question are up on our website. We've got some videos up there. We've got a blog spot up there. You can also email us, and we're happy to answer questions about that. So engage with us. We're really here to help. And anybody who's here, if you'd like to chat on the phone, we'd love to take a chat and see whether we're able to help. Thanks everybody who might just be joining us. If that's true, we're here talking about low back and what you can do about it. So a friend of mine said, when I was talking about a challenge I was having getting out of that hole, I was saying, hey, I'm just having a hard time getting back up to where I used to be. And he looked at me knowing me very well, and he said, Curtis, do you know the first thing you need to do in order to get out of a hole? And I said, no, what is that? And he said, Curtis, you need to stop digging. You just need to stop digging. And at that point in time, I continued to do the things that were making me worse. So if you've got low back pain, what I'm trying to say is start to notice what's aggravating your low back pain. I'm standing here because for me and so many of my clients, sitting all day is an aggravating factor. Now, for most of us, we can't stop sitting all the way, but how much can you diminish it? Can you stand on a conference call? Can you take a walk in between phone calls, or can you walk and talk at the same time? If you had to sit all day, do you have to sit and watch TV at night, or can you lay down? So stop digging. Figure out the thing that's taking money out of your health account. Is it, boy, I'm just not drinking enough water, or I'm sitting in a slouched position? How can you diminish the withdrawals out of the account so you don't keep going into the negative? And as I keep mentioning there, one of the most important pieces is you need to start moving more. And I say it a lot, and people who are around me get sick of hearing it, I think, but the body is cement waiting to harden, and your low back is the same. If you don't get it moving, if you're just stuck in one place, it's really challenging for it to be healthy. So we're going to start to move into some exercises. I'm running a bit behind. I'm hoping people can hang on there. Viata, are you able to see my hip? I don't know whether that shows up in the... Perfect. I'm in standing, and first thing is just to say, you can't see this, but this is a mat. It's squishy and gooey. If you do decide to stand or up and down all day, which is better than standing all day, standing on something that's a little bit squishy is better than standing on something that's hard all day long. So the first exercise I'd like to do is just opening up the hip. We talked a lot about that. Now, I'm going to do it here without my foot on something, but if I can have my foot up on something, on a a chair, that works really nice. And I'm going to open up the hip flexor here because the hip flexors yank into the low back. So let's do, if you have the ability to stand up and do a couple of these things with me, that would be great. Imagine my foot up on something, or you can also do this in just a staggered stance. The first and the most important thing as you get in this staggered stance is that you think about rolling your pelvis down, because when your hip flexors are tight, they're going to arch your back and compress. So you're going to tuck your tailbone under. You're going to think about bringing your belly button up. You're going to think about bringing your sternum down. So your back really is nice and flat here. That's step one, is always good form. And in this exercise, good form is to tuck the tailbone. Step number two is to shift your weight forward a little bit. And as I shift my weight forward, I've got enough tightness here. I feel some tension in the hip flexor. This exercise could also be done with my foot behind me up on something. So feel free to play with that, or as I said, your left foot up. So as you shift your foot forward here, and as you shift your weight forward, the next thing I like to do is any stretch can be made dynamic. In this case, we're going to make the stretch dynamic by doing this little bit of side-to-side motion. And as I slide side to side, I feel how that changes the tension on my hip flexors, on my iliopsoas, if you will. You can also do a little bit of pelvic rotation, a little bit of twist toward the leg and center, a little bit of twist toward the leg and center. If you've got your leg up behind you, all of this works just as well, and it's nice to have yourself holding on to something if your foot's up on something. So my foot could very easily be up on that if that's nice and stable, and I could be doing the same thing. So opening up the hip flexor, number one, and of course you've probably already noticed that as you open up your hip flexors, I'm using this as a way to engage my core. My core is stabilizing my back, and I'm engaging my lower abdominal muscles in order to keep the tension out of my back and isolate it to the tight area. Again, we don't want the rock. We don't want this tight thing to yank on that thing that's already moving too much. This exercise can also be done in kneeling, and that's one of my favorite ways. So that's number one. Number two is we're going to do some massaging of the upper back. Probably my favorite way of massaging the upper back, excuse me for a moment, is to take a foam roller and lie on the floor. Now, most of you at home won't have a foam roller handy, or maybe you do. If you've got a foam roller and you put it on the floor, I'm just going to do a demo with this guy. You're face up. This guy is face up and face down at the same time. That's a problem. So lying on the foam roller, face up. But a lot of times we're in the middle of work and we don't want to do that. We don't take that time, though that is my favorite exercise. Probably a real simple way to do it is to take some sort of a ball. This can be a tennis ball, it can be a lacrosse ball, this happens to be a supernova. To take some sort of a ball, I usually like to drop it in a sock so it doesn't go anywhere, and then lean it up against the wall, and then you can just start to massage your upper and massage your middle back, anywhere from about here to here. And remember, we're trying to break up the cement in our upper back. This tends to feel really good, especially for mid-back, neck, and shoulder, but this is probably one of my most powerful exercises for helping out low back pain, because as you get more into a rounded position, it puts stress in the low back. Tennis ball in a sock, and roll on those ribs that are setting there in the mid-back. I drop that ball, again, ignore the direction of his head. He really likes to be head backward, and just massaging anywhere in this area, spending 2 to 5 minutes mobilizing that thoracic spine with a ball, or like I said, a foam roller works really nicely. So that's number two. Open up the rock, open up the hard place, and get it so those areas aren't putting so much stress on the back. Number three, we've been sitting all day. We've been sitting all day and our back has been rounded. Anytime we take one area and we put it at the end of the range for a long period of time, those of you who were with me last week, you got this visual. You take your low back and you round it all day long. It's really nice just to do the opposite a little bit. And so if you've been sitting all day long, a real simple thing to do is just open up the chest and arch the back, and you can kind of play with that at the diagonal. So you can kind of arch your back a little bit to the right and arch your back a little bit to the left. And it just feels good, especially if you've been rounded all day. Now, of course, if you've been standing all day and your back's been arched, you might need a little bit of the opposite. You might need a little bit of cat. You might need to be able to arch your low back toward the ceiling. So whichever one you've been doing, remember the opposite is what you want to do. If you've been sitting, you probably need some extension. If you've been standing, you probably need some flexion. And if you've been standing all day, I really like to get down into deep squat and really open up my back. So that's number 3. And we got one more exercise here, and that exercise is waking up. So if goal number 1 is to break up the rocks, goal number 2 is to wake up the stuff in the middle. And so a lot of you have probably done kind of core and deep core exercises on the floor, but you can also do these on a wall. Not that you shouldn't do them on the floor, but I find that any little hurdle can be too much for me, and I'm a big fan of making it really easy for clients. So if you just lean up against a wall, and again, feel free to join me here. It's really nice to feel some of this stuff. As I lean up against the wall, I make sure that my back isn't arched. I make sure my back isn't flexed. I make sure my pelvis isn't rotated. I get nice and square to the wall. I think about being nice and long. And then from here, I can do some marching. From here, I can do some legs going behind me, opening up the front of the hip, engaging my core as I take my legs behind me. How's the visual on that, Viata? Viata? How's the visual on that? Awesome. So as I take my legs behind me, it's really easy to arch my back as I take my legs behind me. Just making sure that your back is neutral, and we're really trying to move from the hip, engaging the core and the glutes, engaging the hamstrings, making sure that our neck is nice and long and our back is nice and long, nice and stable as we move. We can also do some arm lifts here. One arm into the other arm. And it's not like this is going to be an aggressive strengthening exercise for your core, but remember, the body's going to want to shut down. The body's going to want to turn off muscles. The more we don't use something, the more those instruments, if you will, those muscles are just going to walk out the door and not want to play in the orchestra. So we just need to keep re-engaging them as the day goes along. Okay, we will be posting this on YouTube for anybody out there that hasn't watched it live on Facebook, and of course you can watch it live on Facebook. We've had some people ask, hey, how do we watch this on other places? We'll be posting this live on YouTube, and you can always check out when these are going to be coming out. Though we're going to be pretty consistent with these now, or we're going to attempt to be anyway, which is about this time on Tuesdays, or not even about this time. We're just going to make it at this time. Next week, next week I don't actually have planned out yet. I would really love your email or your comments here about what we should hit. I've got some opinions about that, but what's coming up next week is going to be is still yet to be determined. I really appreciate everybody showing up. It means a lot to me. Is there any questions that popped up, Viata? Cool. Well, we're here for questions. We really love to help people out in that way. Feel free to email us. I'd love to get on the phone. If someone out there has some neck and shoulder problems, we'd love to just chat with you. Again, complimentary, just to really try to make a difference for people. Join me next week, same sandbox. And, oh, there's my intro card.